Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today, what we have for you is another aftermarket bumper install for a third generation Toyota 4Runner. The bumper installation we're going to show you today comes from Savage Off-Road. It's their front hybrid winch bumper. The rig we're going to put this bumper on is my buddy Tony, who lives nearby in the town of Morgan Hill. For this installation, there's going to be some differences depending on the year that you have. If you have a 96 to 98, you have the more lower profile OEM bumper. If you have a 99 to 2002, you have what is called the fat lip bumper. It sticks out a little bit more on the front end. For the 96 to 98, you don't have to do any modification to your frame rails. It's basically a plug and play application. You could just bolt it right up. You just have to get the OEM bumper off so you can get the Savage bumper on. For the 99 to 2002s, the plate that's on the ends of the frame rails needs to be trimmed down to where you can get the mounting brackets that come with the Savage off-road bumper in place. Since Tony has a 2000, we're going to show the trimming of those frame rails so we can get the Savage off-road brackets in place. For the removal of the OEM bumpers, we're not going to show that for this video because we already showed that in some other videos. For the ARB bumper install we did on Sean's rig, if you have the fat lip bumper and you want to know how to remove that one, you could click on the link above and you can see how we remove that fat lip bumper. If you have a 96 to 98, you could use the video that we made of installing the CBI front hybrid bumper on my 98 4Runner. So click on the link above if you want to know how to remove that lower profile bumper. With all that said, I'm now going to turn it over to Tony. So here's Tony.
So why Savage? I did a fair amount of research. I used 24r.org quite a bit, of course. Not had a 4x4 in about 20 plus years. I put a lot of credence into what the community had to say, and the feedback was exceptionally good. I mean, I guess like most people, I looked at things as far as the approach and departure angles. Also, I liked the fact that Roy himself at Savage was very approachable. He spent a lot of time with me on the phone, addressed my questions. I wanted US steel in my bumpers, and Roy is one of the few guys that actually said he uses US steel and was very proud of that fact as well. Another factor was that it offers the option for a winch up to the 9500 series, so I found that to be a factor as well. And being somewhat weight conscious, I realize that our rigs will be gaining weight, of course, but the Savage bumper I believe to be one of the lightest ones out there, and I found that to be somewhat important to me as well.
So Tony did a good job of explaining why he chose Savage Off-Road for the aftermarket bumpers on his rig. Now let's show you what the bumper looks like and the hardware that comes with it. So here's what the bumper looks like. Here's the frame rail brackets. And then it comes with a hardware bag. One thing to note about Savage Off-Road with the brackets that they make for the bumper install, with all these holes available on the brackets, it can accommodate up to a 3-inch body lift. So you don't have to order anything custom if you have a body lift. It's already built into the brackets. When you order a bumper from Savage, they don't give you the option to have it painted. You have the choice of either rattle canning it with whatever paint color you want, or you can go for a more durable finish and take it to a local powder coater and have the bumper and the brackets powder coated for you. Tony chose to primer it and paint it himself. So in preparation, as you can see, the front bumper is already off. These are the plates that I mentioned at the beginning of the video that we're going to have to trim down so we can get the Savage Off-Road brackets in place. Tony already wired in the LED turn signals that he's going to be installing into the bumper, and then he did some other preparation that he's now going to describe for you.
So as Roy as Savage calls out in the instructions, one might also want to do, for aesthetic reasons only, is to spray some black paint or whatever color they're going to have their bumper back in this area as well, because of the large holes in the bumper that would allow one to see through it. So I took the time to do that. I did some masking off of the AC condenser and the radiator and the tranny cooler as well, and I used the same black paint as I did on the bumper, and so that was done before today. Prior to today, I removed brackets on each side in this location. Here's an example of one right here. There are two nuts that need to get removed from inside the engine bay, right by the air box, and on that side over there by the battery. Once you take those off, there's one to remove right there. So 3 in total, 1 there, 2 in the engine bay, and these brackets can get removed. Now Roy said he would just trim these brackets, and others on the forum commented to that you actually can remove them completely. They really don't serve too much purpose with the factory bumper gone. It adds support where they wrap around. So I decided to go ahead and take them off, and that was the procedure that I used to do so. Also, there's trimming of the wheel well liner that got done. It came out to here and went all the way down, and I believe with certainty that would impact the front Savage bumper that's about to go on. So I trimmed those up, and the results of what I removed is a pretty fair amount, as you can see here. I did so on both sides, and that was the extent of the prep work I did in this location.
So we apologize by not showing the removal of these brackets, but since it was kind of an optional thing that Tony chose to do, we didn't show it. Like Tony said, Roy at Savage Off-Road suggests trimming them, but some guys on the Toyota forums just opted to remove them entirely like Tony did. So what we did here in preparation for the cutting is we marked some lines to follow. One on the top, one on the bottom, and then one on the outside. This is the passenger side. We're starting off fairly conservative, and we don't want to cut into the frame rail, and we don't necessarily want to cut into the weld that welds this plate on. So we're just going to take off this amount first and then see where we're at, and maybe do some secondary cuts, or maybe just go to a grinder wheel to grind it down to where we need it. So what this is a welding blanket that Tony brought with him for the job. This is a nice to have, not really necessary. It's just going to keep from all the debris from the cutting from going into his radiator and his AC condenser and all over the place. It's just going to contain it to where it's just going to drop down onto the asphalt. To do the cutting, we're going to use a DeWalt cordless angle grinder. If you didn't have one of these, there's other options. You could use a reciprocating saw to saw off the ends. You also could do it with a hacksaw, but that would be pretty hard and pretty tiring. So we suggest you either get yourself an angle grinder or you get a power reciprocating saw to saw off the frame rail ends. You want to protect your eye, so use some type of eye protection, because little bits of metal are going to be flying everywhere, and you don't want one of them to end up in your eye and ruin your day and ruin your vision. So we got one side knocked off. Now we're going to go for the bottom and top cuts. Okay, we got the bottom one knocked off, and now Tony's going to go for the upper one. All right, so this is what the end cap on the frame rail looks after doing the 3 cuts. Now we're going to take a look and see if we need to do a secondary cut, or maybe we just go to the grinder and grind down a little bit. After we assessed how close we got the plates cut down to the dimensions of the frame rails, now we're deciding that we're going to just take off the corners, and then that's going to get it a lot closer to the size of the frame rail, and then we'll take a grinder and we're just going to grind down all the edges, make it as nice as we possibly can. We think the reason why we're not taking out these plates all the way is it does add some rigidity to the end of the frame rail, so we think that's why they say not to take the plate all the way off and take the welds out. We're going to leave this plate intact but trim it down as much as we can. Now with it cut down pretty far, we're going to transition to a grinder wheel, and we're going to grind it down further to get it close to the dimensions of the frame. So after doing a bunch of grinding, we test fitted the bracket onto the frame, and we made sure that it's going to meet up with all its attachment points. So on the bottom here, we had to grind it down pretty flush with the frame rail to where there wasn't going to be any gap in between the bracket and the main frame rail because of the weld sticking down a little bit. Then on this side, we were seeing that the part of the bracket was coming up flush with this attachment point. So Tony's going to put it in place and we're going to show you what it looks like. So you just want to make sure that you get a good mating of the bracket with this frame member. There's not any gap, letting you know that you have to take down the plate a little bit more to get a more flush fit. And then same goes for this connection on the bottom of the frame rail. If you're seeing a gap mainly at the front edge, that means you have to take a little bit more of that weld down with your grinder or whatever you have to get a more flush fit of the bottom of the bracket to the frame rail. So the two sides that are most important to get a nice flush grinding or cut is the outside and on the bottom. The top and the inside aren't really a factor. You just need to have these really square and close to the frame rail to where you get a good fitting with the bracket. So we did the same with the driver side. Now what Tony's going to do is he's going to clean up the area with some rubbing alcohol, and then he's going to touch up the paint, because anywhere where we have exposed metal, it's going to be a spot where rust can form. Tony's just going to use some Rust-Oleum flat black. Another good choice might be some chassis roll bar paint that I've used on my rig. So whatever floats your boat. Use what paint makes you happy. Maybe hot pink. So now we're ready to get the brackets attached to the frame. What we need out of the kit is we need the larger bolts with a large flat washer, 2 per side, and where these go is where the factory recovery points, where the hooks were. So that's the 4 big bolts. And then you need 4 smaller bolts with 4 smaller flat washers to attach the bracket on the sides. To attach the bumper to the brackets, you need 5 bolts, 10 washers, and 5 nylon lock nuts. And they give you a couple extra washers in case you misplace a couple. The 2 larger bolts go underneath the frame rails, and then the 2 smaller bolts go right here. Tony's sliding the bracket into place on the passenger side. We got both 19mm bolts started on the bottom, and then now Tony's going to get the 17mm bolts on the side started. Now that we got all 4 bolts started for the bracket, Tony's just going to cinch them up a little bit, but not even get them snug. We're just going to keep them a little bit loose, so when we get the bumper in place, it gives us a little bit of wiggle room to get the bolts that attach to the bracket lined up. Okay, we have both brackets loosely attached to the ends of the frame rails, and now we're ready to get the bumper onto the rig. Right in front here is a transmission jack. If you don't have something like this, maybe you can just put a box or just something that's gonna help you get the bumper in position. A transmission jack or another type of jack is helpful, because then you can jack it up and get the bumper right at the right level to where you can now get the bolts started in the bracket. So I highly suggest using a hydraulic jack if you have one. If not, then do the best you can with whatever you can MacGyver. So now we're going to place the bumper on the transmission jack and roll it to the front of the vehicle. So now I'm going to roll the assembly towards the rig, and Tony's going to be stabilizing it, and so am I going to be stabilizing it. Now I'm going to start using the jack to jack it up higher and get things lined up. So now we're just going to slide it into position. We're at a slope, so we have to be a little bit careful. We have the top plate of the bumper resting on the bracket, so now it's kind of taking the weight to where we don't really need the transmission jack per se, but we're still going to keep it in position until we get a couple bolts started on each side. So here's the proper orientation of the bracket with the bumper. The bumper is on the inside of the bracket on both sides. The 3 bolts that we're going to get started is right here. The 3 most bottom holes, we're going to get 3 of those bolts in to attach the bumper to the bracket. Bolt, washer, and then a washer and nylon lock nut on the back side. So you can see right there we have 3 bolts stacked on top of each other, taking up the 3 bottommost holes. And we did the same on the passenger side. Now we're going to work on getting the last 2 fasteners for each side connected. We're still on the driver's side, and the next 2 bolts that you use to attach the bumper to the bracket are these 2. So there's actually 3 holes here. What you do is you use the forwardmost hole on the top, and then you go diagonal and you use the bottom hole. There could be some confusion because there is another hole right up above here, but they want you to put them diagonal. And now we're going to do the same with the passenger side. So here's the order of how we tighten everything up once we got the bumper connected to the bracket. We first made sure that the brackets were mating up with the frame really square with no gaps, and we tightened the 2 19mm bolts snug. Then we went to the other 2 bolts that hold the bracket onto the frame, these 17mm bolts, and we snugged these up. We got the fit of the bumper, even gap between the body and the bumper, and we tightened up the top bolts on each side. So we got the gap on the driver's side, tightened up the top bolt, went to the passenger side, got the gap between the bumper and the body we wanted, tightened up that one to hold it in place. Then we went back and we tightened up the middle bolt and the bottommost bolt and snugged those up. Finally, we need to tighten these 2 bolts, and then we'll be done. With these 2 middle bolts, the bolt goes from the outside with a flat washer, and then on the opposite side you put another flat washer and the nylon lock nut. We use the ratchet on this side and then an open-end wrench on the other side to tighten them up, and we found this one to be a little bit trickier to get tight because we had to come in with an open-end wrench on this side with a socket on the back side to get them tight. So it's just a little bit tight to get an open-end wrench, especially for the bottommost one, but you can do it. You just get on there with the open-end wrench at an angle, and then you can tighten up the nut from the back side. So we got the bumper all cinched up, and now what Tony's going to do is he's going to get his turn signal lenses hooked up to the bumper.
Okay, so with these turn signal indicators, they have a designated top here in the front. I also marked it here in the back with a T, so they'll get positioned like so. And then also electrically, so there's not any kind of reverse polarity, I marked how this should connect, because if it's the wrong way, then they won't blink in unison. This is the surround for the turn signal indicator, and this needs to get inserted into the bumper such that the bumper is going to be between here and then the outside flange. Like so.
The turn signal grommet goes in first, and then you plug in the lens.
Keeping the top on the top, which that's the top. Like so.
So it took a little bit of force to get it in there, but Tony knows how to force things into tight spaces, so good job, Tony.
All right.
And we're gonna do the same with the other one. In regards to the turn signals, I show how I wired my turn signals on my front CBI bumper. So if you wanted to know how to do that, you can consult that video that I linked earlier, and you can see how I wired the turn signals and also installed a LED relay so the turn signals wouldn't blink really fast. So here's the final result of the Savage front bumper on a 3rd Gen 4Runner. It's gonna be kind of dark, huh? All right, we're all done with this job. It's pretty straightforward. It just takes a little bit of time and patience to cut those frame end rails down and then get them ground down to the proper amount to where the Savage off-road brackets fit nicely on the ends of the frame rails. After that, it's just a matter of getting the bumper in position, getting a couple bolts started on each side, and then slowly working your way to getting them all started. You tighten the brackets up and make sure those are nice and aligned with the ends of the frame rails. And then you just work your way around, cinching things up and paying attention to how even the bumper looks on the rig. You don't want a large gap on one side and a little bit of a gap on the other side. So you eyeball it, you loosen, you manipulate. It's a little tedious, but sooner or later you're going to get it where you want it. Having a friend help you is really crucial for that part of it, getting the right fit. So if you have a buddy to help you, that's the way to go. In the video description, we are going to provide a link to that PDF installation file from Savage, so you can have the same information we had available. In regards to torque specs, we don't have any torque specs for you. We're using the German standard of Guten tight. Just get them nice and tight to where the bolts aren't going to come out and your bumper's going to fall off, which would be a bad thing. So, no torque specs. It's okay. You don't need the torque spec. Just get them tight. A follow-up for this video is we're going to show installing a winch on Tony's rig, because one of the reasons why Tony bought this Savage off-road bumper is he plans on putting a winch on it. With all that said, thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean and special guest Tony. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you have any questions or comments, do that below. Take care. Bye-bye. Sick mods and sick bumpers.